For years, everyone believed René Angélil, the eldest son of Celine Dion, was destined to carry on his mother's extraordinary legacy. Born into music royalty, the expectation seemed unavoidable. He would sing, he would perform, he would stay in the spotlight that had defined Celine's entire life. But behind closed doors, René Charles was quietly charting his own path. For nearly 2 decades, the family kept it secret. His mother guarded his privacy, and many wondered why. Now, at 24 years old, René Charles has finally revealed the truth. His late father, René Angélil, would have been stunned. The boy who the world thought would follow Celine onto the stage has chosen something entirely different. What he admitted this year explains his secrecy, his mother's protectiveness, and why his story is one of the most surprising turns in the Dion legacy. Before Celine Dion became one of the greatest voices in music history, she was simply the youngest child in a household that never seemed to have enough space, food, or money. Born on March 30th, 1968, in Charlemagne, Quebec, Celine was the 14th child in a family that lived in constant survival mode. Their small home was so full that her mother, Thérèse, often joked there wasn't even room for one more spoon at the dinner table. It wasn't just a playful exaggeration. Inside that crowded home, every inch of space mattered. When Celine came home from the hospital as a newborn, her parents didn't even have a crib waiting for her. Instead, they placed her in a dresser drawer lined with blankets. Not because it was quirky or cute, but because it was their only option. They simply couldn't afford baby furniture. The Dion family lived with limits that would have broken most households, yet somehow they managed to keep going. Her father, Adhémar, worked long, grueling hours as a butcher for little pay, while her mother stayed home, sewing clothes from scraps and hand-me-downs, managing a household of nearly 20 people. Childhood for Celine wasn't about comfort. It was about survival. Beds were overcrowded, often shared by 3 sisters at a time, with little Celine crammed into the middle. The couches, the floors, even the hallways became sleeping spots. She would later describe it simply, "We slept like sardines." Unlike many Canadian families of the time, who were gradually getting smaller, the Dion household felt like its own bustling village. There was never quiet, never privacy, and never enough money to go around. But amid all the struggle, there was one constant source of joy. Music flowed through the Dion household as naturally as breathing. Her father loved to sing, her mother played violin, and her siblings learned instruments whenever they could. Even her name, Celine, came from a French song her parents cherished, a quiet hope that this baby girl would one day carry a song of her own into the world. Yet outside of her home, Celine faced a very different reality. At school, she was mocked relentlessly. Her skinny frame, her awkward smile, her large teeth, all became targets for bullies who nicknamed her Vampire. The ridicule wasn't occasional, it was daily. Journalists later joined in, cruelly dubbing her K9 Dion in the tabloids. For a sensitive child, these words cut deeply, leaving scars she carried into adulthood. She admitted that every day walking into school, she felt dread, knowing what was coming. In photos from her childhood, Celine often looks quiet, almost withdrawn, as though she wanted to disappear from view. Despite the bullying, music became her shield. At just 5 years old, she began performing with her family in their small piano bar. She wasn't treated as a novelty act, she was part of the band. The Dion children formed a family group, performing at weddings, local venues, and anywhere they could earn a little extra money. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave Celine a stage. While school made her feel invisible, the family basement became her safe haven. There, surrounded by siblings and instruments, she discovered her voice. Her very first performance came in 1973 at her brother Michel's wedding. Just a little girl, she stepped up and sang for a room full of people. That night, her family saw something remarkable. Celine wasn't just singing for fun. She was pouring herself into every note, transforming her pain into power. The applause she received became a small spark that would ignite into something much larger. By the time she was 12, Celine wasn't just singing, she was writing. She composed her first song, recorded a demo with her family's help, and unknowingly set the stage for the next chapter of her extraordinary journey. What began in a crowded, noisy house, where survival was the only goal, was about to expand beyond her family's imagination. Celine Dion may have been born into music, but her path to greatness was never simple. For much of her childhood and teenage years, she faced constant ridicule, humiliation, and doubt from the outside world. At school, Celine was the target of relentless bullying. She was tall, awkwardly thin, and had teeth that made her stand out from the other children. Kids at school weren't kind about it. They called her vampire because of her prominent teeth, and mocked her every chance they got. The teasing wasn't occasional, it was every single day. For a sensitive young girl who already felt invisible in a family of 14 children, the ridicule cut deep. She admitted years later that walking into class each morning filled her with dread, because she knew exactly what was coming. There was no escape, and it wasn't just children who mocked her. As her talent began to get attention in Quebec, even adults joined in. Local newspapers wrote about her voice, but they couldn't resist cruel headlines about her appearance. Some tabloids nicknamed her K9 Dion, poking fun at her teeth. Imagine being a teenager, dreaming of performing, but instead of being celebrated, you're ridiculed publicly by grown adults. It was the kind of criticism that could have ended her dream right there. But Celine refused to let it. Instead of breaking her, it became her fuel. She would later admit that those early years left scars she never fully forgot, but they also gave her an inner strength. If people were going to talk about her, she would make sure they eventually talked about her voice, not her looks. Still, the pressure weighed on her. By the age of 18, Celine had quietly made a decision. She underwent dental surgery, got caps and braces, and transformed her smile. She didn't announce it, she didn't make a show of it. She simply returned with a new look, ready to be judged for her talent instead of her teeth. It was part of a larger pattern in her life. Whenever the world tried to box her in, she reinvented herself and came back stronger. School itself had never been a place of joy for her. She once admitted simply, "I detested school." It wasn't just about the bullying, it was that she never felt like she belonged there. Her real education was happening at home. Around the dinner table and in the basement filled with instruments, her siblings became her teachers. She didn't learn from books and chalkboards. She learned from harmonies and chords. She learned that music wasn't just sound, it was survival. With money tight, her family needed every possible way to earn an income. That's when the Dion children formed a family band. All 14 siblings were part of it, and together, they performed in local venues across Quebec. For Celine, this wasn't just entertainment, it was training. At just 5 years old, she was already performing with confidence beyond her years, standing on tiny stages in smoky halls and singing like she belonged there. She wasn't treated like a child novelty, she was treated as a professional. These performances were not just for fun, they helped put food on the table. The Dion family's survival literally depended on music, and Celine carried that weight even as a child. But something else was happening during these family performances. While the outside world laughed at her, on stage she came alive. The music gave her freedom. It gave her a place where appearance didn't matter, and bullies couldn't reach her. Every note she sang was her way of fighting back against the voices that told her she wasn't good enough. Every cheer from a crowd, no matter how small, built her confidence brick by brick. She would run home after school, not to play with friends, but to lock herself in the basement with her siblings and practice. The basement became her refuge. Surrounded by guitars, violins, and laughter, she discovered that when she sang, she wasn't invisible anymore. In that basement, Celine Dion began to realize that her voice was her greatest weapon. It would carry her out of the ridicule, out of poverty, and far beyond the little town of Charlemagne. By the time she was just 12 years old, her destiny was already set in motion. By the time Celine was 12 years old, her talent was undeniable, but talent alone wasn't enough to escape the small town of Charlemagne. Her family knew she needed someone powerful to believe in her, someone who could take her beyond the smoky bars and wedding receptions of Quebec. That's when her mother and brother decided to take a risk that could have ruined them completely. They helped Celine write her first song, recorded a demo, and scraped together enough money to send it to a man named René Angélil, one of the most respected music managers in Quebec. But they only had enough money to send one tape. If it got lost in the mail or tossed into a trash bin, everything would end right there. It was their one shot. When René received the tape, he didn't just hear a little girl singing. He heard something so powerful that it stopped him cold. He later admitted it was the most extraordinary voice he had ever heard. Some say he cried while listening. Others said he simply sat in stunned silence. Either way, he knew he had found something rare. He agreed to meet Celine and her family. When they arrived at his office, he didn't even have a proper microphone ready. Instead, he handed her a pencil and told her to pretend it was a mic. Celine didn't hesitate. She stood in that room, surrounded only by her family and René, and sang with the force of someone performing for a packed stadium. René was floored. He said later she sang like there were 10,000 people watching. In that moment, he decided to risk everything on her. Against the advice of his friends, who called him insane, René mortgaged his own home, over $100,000, to finance the launch of her career. He was gambling not just his money, but his entire future, on a 12-year-old girl with no stage experience outside of family performances. But Celine proved him right almost immediately. Between the ages of 13 and 18, she recorded 9 French-language albums, an astonishing feat for someone still in her teens. At 15, she became the first Canadian artist to earn a gold record in France with her hit song D'amour ou d'amitié. She wasn't just a promising singer anymore. She was becoming an international star. What began as a desperate gamble by her family and René turned into a career that was building unstoppable momentum. Celine Dion had gone from singing in basements and bars to being hailed as the new voice of Quebec, and the world was only beginning to notice. By the time Celine Dion turned 18, she was no longer just a rising star in Quebec. She was becoming a young woman, caught in a secret that could have destroyed everything she had worked for. Behind the bright stage lights and her carefully polished image, Celine was deeply in love with her manager, René Angélil, the man who had discovered her voice when she was only 12 years old. He was 44, nearly 3 decades older than her, divorced twice, and already a well-known figure in the music industry. The relationship was impossible by every measure, and yet for Celine, it was the only thing she wanted. She kept a picture of him under her pillow and admitted later that she would stare at it every night while lying next to her mother. The obsession was so intense that it made her feel physically sick. She would daydream about him constantly, unable to sleep, unable to focus on anything else. The more forbidden it felt, the stronger her feelings became. But when her mother, Thérèse, discovered the truth, the household was shaken. Thérèse had been her biggest supporter, the one who believed in her talent from the very beginning, the woman who mortgaged the family home just to give Celine a chance. But now, she was horrified. To her, René wasn't just too old. He was dangerous. He had been a father figure in Celine's life since childhood, and Thérèse saw the relationship as reckless and even predatory. She confronted Celine, expecting her daughter to back down. But Celine refused. She told her mother, "We live in a free country. I can love whoever I want." It wasn't just a statement of love. It was a declaration of independence. She was no longer the shy little girl mocked at school. She was an adult, and she was determined to make her own choices. At 19, Celine and René began dating in secret. They didn't dare reveal their romance publicly, because they knew people would judge them harshly. For years, they hid their love from the press, presenting themselves as nothing more than artist and manager. Behind closed doors, though, their relationship only deepened. During this time, Celine also made another bold decision that would change her career forever. In late 1986, she quietly stepped away from the spotlight for 18 months. She capped her teeth, transformed her hair, and studied English until she spoke it fluently. She wasn't content to remain a French-language star. She wanted the world. When she returned, the transformation was complete. No longer the awkward teenager ridiculed for her looks, she was ready to become a global force. This reinvention set the stage for the biggest break of her early career, the night she would step onto one of the most watched stages in the world and prove that her love story and her ambition were both unstoppable. Celine Dion's transformation was complete by the late 1980s, and now it was time to show the world what she could do. The opportunity came in 1988, when she represented Switzerland at the Eurovision Song Contest. It may have seemed unusual for a Canadian teenager to sing for another country, but that night, none of it mattered. Standing before more than 600 million viewers across Europe, Celine delivered a performance that electrified the stage. The results came down to the final vote, and Switzerland beat the United Kingdom by just a single point, 137 to 136. That razor-thin victory launched her into international fame overnight. At just 20 years old, she had conquered one of the biggest stages in the world, and suddenly, the shy girl from Charlemagne was a continental star. But Celine was far from done. 2 years later, she released her first English-language album, Unison, in 1990, and it changed everything. Breaking into the English-speaking market was no easy task for a French-Canadian singer, but Celine made it look effortless. The album sold over 1.2 million copies in the United States and went platinum, while in Canada, it went 7 times platinum. The single, Where Does My Heart Beat Now, climbed to number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, an almost unheard-of achievement for a newcomer from Quebec. Critics began comparing her voice to the greatest legends in music, calling it pure, strong, and unforgettable. Even the Wall Street Journal, a publication known for finance and business rather than music, praised her as a once-in-a-generation voice. She was no longer just a Canadian sensation. She was becoming a global icon. Her big breakthrough moment in America came on live television. In 1992, she performed Beauty and the Beast with Peabo Bryson at the Academy Awards. The song had just won an Oscar and a Grammy, and her flawless delivery in front of Hollywood's biggest names brought the audience to its feet. That same year, she released another English-language album, and within days, she was back on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. After watching her sing, Leno looked directly into the camera and predicted she would have an extraordinary career. His words turned out to be prophetic. Celine Dion was no longer the bullied schoolgirl mocked for her teeth. She was now one of the most promising new voices in the world, and the spotlight that had once felt so cruel was now hers to command. Fame, however, wasn't the only part of her life changing. Behind the scenes, her romance with René Angélil was becoming harder to hide. By the early 1990s, whispers began to spread about their unusual love story. But Celine wasn't ready to reveal it just yet. She wanted the world to see her as an artist first and a wife second. Still, in just a few short years, she would shock her fans not just with her music, but with a wedding that no one could ignore. By the mid-1990s, Celine Dion was at the height of her career. Her albums were selling millions. Her voice was being compared to legends, and her fame was spreading across the globe. But behind the bright lights and roaring applause, her personal life was filled with heartbreak, sacrifice, and a struggle that few fans ever knew about. On December 17, 1994, Celine shocked the world when she married René Angélil in a live televised ceremony watched by millions. The wedding took place at the Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal, with over 500 guests filling the church. She wore a silk gown with a 20-foot train and a tiara so heavy it weighed 7 pounds. For years, their relationship had been kept quiet, hidden from judgment and gossip. But that night, they stepped into the open, and Celine declared to the world that her love for René was as powerful as her voice. Their marriage, however, was immediately tested. In 1999, just 5 years after their wedding, René was diagnosed with throat cancer. The news was devastating. He began treatment, and Celine, at the peak of her career, walked away from the spotlight to be at his side. She later admitted that she didn't care about money or fame during that time. All she wanted was to help him heal. Together they fought through surgery, radiation, and months of uncertainty. René recovered, but the experience left lasting scars on their lives. Around the same time, Celine was facing another painful challenge. Her dream of becoming a mother was slipping further out of reach. For nearly a decade, she underwent fertility treatments, endured 7 rounds of IVF, and even suffered a miscarriage. The pressure was crushing, both emotionally and physically. To the public, she was one of the most successful women in the world, but privately, she was fighting a battle that tested her strength in ways that no stage or audience ever could. Then, after years of disappointment, her miracle finally arrived. On January 25, 2001, Celine gave birth to her first child, a son named René Charles, in Florida. He arrived 3 weeks early, weighing 6 pounds, 8 ounces. For Celine, holding him was nothing short of a blessing after so many years of heartbreak. She took a break from the spotlight for 3 years to focus on her new family, putting her career second for the first time in her life. But even in the joy of motherhood, her journey was not complete. During the IVF process, another embryo had been created, one that remained frozen for nearly 9 years. In 2010, that embryo helped bring her twin boys, Nelson and Eddie, into the world. After years of heartbreak, loss, and sacrifice, Celine Dion's story of motherhood became one of hope, persistence, and miracles. Even as Celine Dion fought private battles for her family, her career was reaching heights few artists in history have ever touched. In 1996, she released Falling Into You, an album that would sell more than 32 million copies worldwide and win the Grammy for Album of the Year. A year later, she followed with Let's Talk About Love, selling over 31 million copies and containing the song that would change everything, My Heart Will Go On. Released as the theme for the movie Titanic, it became a global phenomenon. By 1998, the single had sold 18 million physical copies, topped charts in more than 20 countries, and was being played on U.S. radio to more than 117 million listeners in a single month. The song won an Academy Award, a Grammy, and cemented Celine as one of the most powerful voices of her generation. At the same time, she was reshaping the music industry in another way. In 2003, Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas built a $95 million theater, the Coliseum, specifically for her residency. Before Celine, Las Vegas was seen as the last stop for fading stars. After Celine, it became the place where legends reinvented themselves. Her residency lasted 5 years, sold more than 3 million tickets, and earned nearly $400 million. Other superstars like Elton John, Britney Spears, and Lady Gaga would follow her lead. But Celine was the one who made it possible. Yet behind all this triumph, her personal life was unraveling once again. In 2013, René's cancer returned. This time, the disease was relentless. Doctors removed tumors, but the damage was severe. He could no longer eat and was fed through a tube. Celine became his caretaker, often feeding him herself in between rehearsals and shows. Even as his health declined, René continued to guide her career from behind the scenes, but their life was no longer about fame, it was about survival. In 2014, Celine canceled her shows in Las Vegas and an upcoming tour in Asia to devote herself fully to her husband's care. These were not small sacrifices. Millions of dollars were at stake, yet she didn't hesitate. She later said, "I wanted to give every ounce of my strength to him." After a long and brutal fight, René Angélil passed away in January 2016 at the age of 73. Celine, who had loved him since she was a teenager, stayed by his side until the very end. She lost not just her husband, but the man who had discovered her, believed in her, and guided her every step of the way. For the world, Celine Dion was still the global superstar who could fill arenas with her voice. But in her heart, she was a widow, left to raise 3 young sons alone, carrying the weight of both her career and her grief. After losing René, Celine Dion faced the hardest chapter of her life. Just when it seemed she might begin to heal, her own health began to collapse. For years, she hid her pain from the public, performing as many as 70 shows a year, while secretly battling symptoms doctors couldn't explain. She pushed through spasms, stiffness, and terrifying moments when her voice refused to cooperate. Only when the pandemic forced her to stop did specialists finally discover the truth. In 2022, she was diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that affects only 1 or 2 people in a million. It causes violent muscle spasms, twisting the body, damaging the spine, and stealing the ability to walk. There is no cure. In her 2024 documentary I Am, Celine Dion, the world saw the brutal reality for the first time. Cameras rolled as she suffered an 8-minute seizure during a recording session, her body frozen, her voice silenced, while doctors rushed to keep her conscious. First, she insisted the footage remain in the film, wanting fans to understand the truth of her condition. To protect her, her 14-year-old twins, Nelson and Eddie, became part of her care team. They learned to spot the signs of an oncoming crisis, practiced emergency drills, and even checked on her if she was late getting ready for bed. No child should bear such responsibility, yet they handled it with love and courage. Through it all, Celine continued to feel René's presence, speaking to him in her darkest moments, drawing strength from the bond that death had not broken. The world recognized her resilience, but her focus shifted away from fame and toward family. And while Celine's health struggles shocked millions, her eldest son, René Angélil, was quietly stepping out of her shadow. For years, everyone assumed he would follow his mother's path into music, and in 2021, he did release a hip-hop EP that introduced him to a new audience. But in July 2025, he stunned the world again, not with a song, but with cards. Entering the World Series of Poker main event, René Angélil outlasted thousands of players, advancing to Day 5 with 2.8 million chips and earning nearly $70,000. His late father had been a passionate poker player, and now René Angélil carried on that legacy in his own way. At just 24, he was proving he didn't need to follow anyone's footsteps, not even his mother's. Instead, he was carving his own path, balancing music in one hand and poker in the other. For Celine Dion, the girl who once slept in a dresser drawer and grew up mocked by classmates, life had been filled with unimaginable highs and devastating lows. She had conquered the world with her voice, endured heartbreak that would have crushed most, and now faced an illness that threatened to silence her forever. Yet through it all, her children, especially René Angélil, stood as proof that her story was far from over. Even as her body struggled, her legacy was alive in them, resilient, surprising, and stronger than anyone ever expected.